has Martin Lewis single-handedly protected the state pension from liability to income tax? Doubtless he'll tell me. Why were budget preparations so shambolic? The Treasury Chief Secretary, James Murray, will reveal all, or possibly not. Is Europe sufficiently ready for the war Putin is threatening? I'll ask the former NATO Secretary-General Anders Fogh Rasmussen. What do you make of Reeves's big budget? Pippa and Screeny think they know what you think.
We have exclusive polling asking people what motivated the Chancellor's tax rises.
And with the Prime Minister once again weeping over Brexit, it's Remain Essential again throughout the show with the Tory Tom Tugendhat and Lib Dem Layla Moran. Watcher, the first headline in Labour's general election manifesto, published only 17 months ago, was Restore Hope. The second was Stop the Chaos. How's that going, Prime Minister? As I said to Keir Starmer on Monday, in decades of reporting on budgets, the only one whose preparations have seemed to me more chaotic was Liz Truss's wrongly named mini-budget, and that didn't end well for her Chancellor or for herself. So, for what it's worth, over the past fortnight or so, I have detected a dramatic shift in opinion among Labour MPs and across the media, to the effect that there's now an almost universal expectation that both Reeves and Starmer will be out of their jobs within the coming year, probably after the Scotland, Wales and local elections in May. Now, to be clear, the Westminster herd may be wrong. It often is. But when confidence has been lost by a Prime Minister and Chancellor, it's desperately hard to rebuild it. Ask John Major, Theresa May, Liz Truss, Boris Johnson. However, it is with those precedents that just possibly Starmer can reinforce his bunker. The point is that all Labour MPs were elected on that manifesto platform of supposedly stopping the chaos. And although maybe half of those MPs fear that they're set to lose their seats at the next election and have nothing to lose from rolling the dice and ejecting the Prime Minister, in doing so, they would be confirming what many voters suspect, which is that Labour is as much a chaos machine as the Conservative Party was. Labour MPs have made their bed with Starmer in it, and maybe they just need to lie in it. For better or worse, though, when I say that to those MPs, they think I'm stark raving mad. Pippa.
Thanks, Robert. Well, despite Rachel Reeves's chaotic budget and the lack of certainty over the leadership, the government is determined to cut through the noise and sell its choices. So what do the public really think? Moran asked people how they felt about the budget in just a couple of words. As you can see, it's not been the most positive response for the Chancellor. People think it's bad, rubbish, and are feeling disappointed and, in some cases, indifferent. It's perhaps not surprising that tax gets a big mention after that £26 billion hike. The Chancellor says she put up taxes to double her fiscal buffer and to invest in creaky public services, but voters don't seem quite so convinced. This exclusive polling shows that more than 60% of people think that Rachel Reeves's desire to please Labour MPs was a motivating factor, and just over half, 55%, said she put up taxes to spend more on welfare, suggesting that opposition attacks may be cutting through. But Labour MPs will argue that this was the right thing to do. Look at the impact of lifting child poverty limit by the child poverty cap by constituency, each one represented by a coloured dot. The further to the right, the more that children are impacted by the cap. See this wee grey dot all the way over here? This is the inner London constituency of Diane Abbott, where a huge 33% of kids are affected. These white diamonds are the average rate of affected children for all the seats held by each party. As you can see, more Labour constituencies in red are impacted by the cap, with an average of 12% of children. Tory seats are lower, on 8%, but the highest is Reform. The turquoise dots here, which are on 15%. No wonder they backed lifting the cap, although with some caveats. Robert.
Gosh, so there's tons I want to pick up with both of you about the budget a little bit later on, but if you'll forgive me, I just want to start actually with another bit of political news, which was the disclosure in the Financial Times that Farage had been talking to his donors and saying he thinks a pact with the Tory party is more likely than not, in fact, very likely before the election. Tom, if there were a pact with Reform, could you stay in the Tory party?
Well, there won't be one. I mean, Kemi's been very clear about it. I understand why Farage is talking about it. He realises he's maxed out on his percentage and he's flatlining, which is why he's now re-announcing people who defected ages ago. Those last three names, they were actually pre-announced, I think, around Christmas time. So, you know, we're going over the same ground again because he's struggling to move on from where he is. Now, I appreciate the polls aren't great for us at the moment, but Kemi's beginning to cut through and beginning to make a difference and has demonstrated that she can actually make the arguments that the country wants to hear. So I can understand why he's saying it, but we're not listening.
Layla, I mean, we are living through a fragmentation of political allegiances that actually nobody alive has experienced. Without sort of committing your party to a particular alliance, but do you think by the time of the election we will see alliances on left and right?
I think, actually, the bigger question here for me is, you know, do we have a system that's now fit for purpose for a five-party system? Because that's what we've now got. And when I speak to voters, I mean, they'll work out what to do at the elections. I actually think voters will find a way. They always do. My worry, though, is that we've now got a situation with under first past the post that Reform could get 26% of the vote and sweep to power. And I think that's terrible for our democracy for so many reasons, not least Russian influence on Farage. We'll come to that, I'm sure, a bit later on. So what we need, I think, is a change in our voting system that better reflects the actual proportions of votes out there. So we end up in a government that actually reflects what people voted for, not this chaos that we're seeing with huge swings to one party or another, sweeping up loads of seats that they've never held before, very inexperienced MPs who then have to learn the ropes, and half of them get turfed out of the next election. This is a function now of first past the post in a five-party system. It needs to change. The time has come. I
mean, even on the basis of the election we just saw, something like 4 out of 5 British people didn't vote for Labour, and yet Labour won that stonking majority. Do you believe that first past the post is still fit for purpose?
Look, Robert, you've got two choices, right? Either you can form a coalition before you vote, which is the way that we try to do it. So you've got to get a coalition of people who broadly align around Conservative values or around Labour values, and then individuals across the United Kingdom can choose which of those coalitions they vote for, or neither. Or you...
But do you think that is what actually happened at the last election? I'm not so sure that is what happened.
I think that's what happens in every election. People look at parties and they choose a coalition that, broadly speaking, aligns with what they want, and they choose that individual who they want to represent them. Or you can do it afterwards and you just do backroom deals and politicians are in charge of who they choose. I mean, what you get in list systems, and you see this all over Europe, by the way, you see this all over the world in list systems, is a senior politician picks their mates, and you can vote for whoever you like, but you're getting the top 5 people on that list. And so actually
I don't think
fundamentally undemocratic.
Anyone who's serious about some kind of electoral reform, no one is actually suggesting that you remove completely the geographical constituency link, that most of the forms that are being discussed seriously now, for those who are proponents of it, I really value that, and I absolutely value that. But I think what we've got in this country, we are now uniquely vulnerable to huge swings, to these smaller parties, and I think voters are fed up. They are absolutely fed up. They were fed up with the Conservatives. They're now getting fed up with Labour. They've lost trust, and actually we have to rebuild that. But the reason this isn't working is because governments are elected with huge majorities. They say, oh, we stood on this manifesto and everyone voted for us and it was wonderful. No, they didn't. A third of the country voted for them. 2/3 didn't. And then they enact, because they've got a huge majority in Parliament, this manifesto that actually most people didn't want. That's the problem.
Tom, I'm going to come back to you in a minute or two. First, I'm delighted to be joined by ITV colleague, at least you spent some of your time as an ITV colleague, Martin Lewis. Really good to see you. There is nobody better placed to assess some of the Chancellor's and Prime Minister's claims about what they've achieved with this budget. One of the things that they keep saying that is important about this budget is they say they are sort of pressing down on the cost of living, and in particular they've transferred from customers' bills to central government a big chunk of the climate change adjustment costs. You, I think, though, have some concerns that not all of that reduction in the burden for companies will be passed on to the consumer.
I have both concerns it won't all be passed on and the transparency of how it is passed on.
So tell us about...
So the government has said there'll be a £150 reduction on energy bills coming in April and I can say on this show, ceteris paribus, everything else remaining equal. Well, first of all, in April, we were expecting to see bills on the price cap go up by 3%. So what we're now looking at is a 5% decrease in the price cap coming in April. The way it will actually work is we'll have a unit rate reduction of 3.5 pence on electricity and 0.35 pence on gas. Right. But the price cap is all the people who haven't switched. Oh, yeah. So it's about 63% of people. There are many people right now on fixed tariffs. That's what I suggest they do. That's what the competitive market suggests they do. The price cap is a pants cap. Those people have locked into a tariff. So the question is, what happens to those people who are on fixes? Now, I've spoken to Ed Miliband about this, and he wrote on the back to all the energy firms saying, we will expect you to pass on this cut to all your customers in its entirety. Mm-hmm. But it isn't that simple.
Right.
So I'm going to give you two different scenarios a company could do. The first is it could launch a fix in January, knowing that this price will drop in April, so that 9/12 of the year will have a lower price. Average that over the 12 months so that when you get your January price, it's factoring in the cheaper price that's going for the rest of the year. So then you won't get a drop in April. Alternatively, you could sign up for a fix in January and then the rate drops in April. There has not yet, and I'm not sure if they're planning to, been any guidance for firms of how they should be incorporating the cut on fixes.
But if you were going to make a recommendation, what would you suggest?
Well, I was going to say, I've spoken to big energy bosses who are going, you know, this is going to be an absolute nightmare. People won't believe we've done the cut. I would say it's very simple. On the 1st of April, the price cap will come down 5%. I believe everybody who is on every form of tariff at that time should see a reduction of 3.5 pence on the unit rate of electricity and 0.35 pence on the unit rate of gas. So if you're on a fix, your fix will get cheaper. And if I were the government and I were in a political sense, what do you want? You want to see everybody's prices dropping today. You don't want little bits dropping around, some doing it in January, some in February. You want 1st of April, it's energy price cut day. You're all getting a drop in your bills. So I'm hoping, because I think that's also good for transparency for consumers, to be able to win the argument that politicians need to put pressure on firms to do it all in a day, so then everyone can see their price go down, because I think that's important for consumers. But I also, you know, if I were Ed Miliband, that's exactly what I would want to happen.
So you've spoken to Ed Miliband. What does he say?
Well, the first point was writing to the companies. I've since been talking to a couple of big bosses of the big energy companies, and they're saying, we haven't got any guidance. That's the next week's job.
All right, well, good luck with that. Now, we did see you. I thought it slightly surreal. We had the Chancellor on your show last Thursday. You asked her, very sensibly, about the way that the freezing of thresholds means that with the triple lock, basic state pension going up, for the first time ever, those who rely on the basic state pension would, all other things being equal, your phrase, be paying income tax. But she gave you a pledge live on air that those people would not pay income tax. So, well, that's what it looked like to me. So, well, what do you think happened, and how is she going to exempt these people from income tax?
So, first of all, Pippa did her research earlier. What I think is fascinating in this, you mentioned £28 billion of taxes. That's not how the public think. The public think about pounding their pocket. But I think we are now getting to the point that fiscal drag, freezing the thresholds, has been there so long. It used to be a stealth tax. The public are now economically educated that it is a tax. Yeah. And it is increasing their taxes. So I think the stealthiness of it has started to disappear. Yeah. So you're right. The full new state pension will be £30 less than the personal allowance from next April. Yeah. And the fact it has to go up by a minimum of 2.5% on the triple lot means from 2027, it will be more. It's worth noting, people on the old basic pension, so if you took state pension age before 2016 and you've got SERPs, which is also the state pension, they're already over the threshold paying tax right now. And a lot of those got in touch with me after the interview and said, what about us? What the Chancellor said to me was, and we were talking about from 2027 onwards.
Yeah.
I was most concerned about the admin of people having to do self-assessment, 90-year-olds with dementia doing self-assessment. And I was very surprised. I then read back to what she said in the budget, and I think this is what she meant to say in the budget, but it just was very badly phrased, and so none of us picked it up, is that if you go just over the threshold and your only income is the full state pension...
which is what we're talking about.
You won't pay tax. But we have to get quite complex on this. So first of all, I'll give you an example. If you had a few years less of national insurance... So you didn't get the full state pension, and you had a £50 private pension, you could have less income in total than the full state pension, but still be paying tax. I asked, how are you going to do this? And the answer was, we are working through it. And one of the interesting things about this whole budget, I felt, was when I was presenting it in my show, I split it into pages. Here's what's happening in 2026. Here's what's happening in 2027. Here's what's happening in 2028. And here's what's happening in 2029. And they were the retail offerings. And it is so far ahead that some of these announcements are actually not really properly thought through. How are we going to actually tax electric vehicles when it comes to 2028? And I do think, why was it all done so early? But on this particular one, it's a wait-and-see mode till April 2027 to exactly what they'll put in place and how it'll consult. And there's a lot more like that too.
Now, we haven't got a lot of time left, but there's one more big thing I need to ask you, but you're going to set this up for us, aren't you, Pippa?
Yes, Robert. Now, this chart from the Resolution Foundation shows the gap in wealth between younger and older people. This is the average wealth per adult in a family. As you can see, people are at the best off in their 60s, their early 60s. But look how much that gap has widened over time. The yellow line shows people's wealth just before the financial crash in 2008, while the red line is the early 2020s. Intergenerational inequality has become even more entrenched over time. Now, let's look at this from our Youth Tracker survey last month. It shows that 3 in 5 young people think politicians care more about the needs of rich people and big business, these first 2 blocks here. 27% say they don't care about young people, and 29% say people like themselves. No wonder they're turning to parties with more radical economic offers. Robert.
Yeah, so as Pippa says, and the whole world knows this, that over the last 20 years or so, older people have done way better, both in terms of wealth and income, than younger people. And, you know, one of the things that I was slightly shocked by is that if you happen to be a younger person at university very recently, paying the higher, or rather, having to borrow larger sums of money to go to university, because the thresholds have also been frozen for when you start to repay student debts. Those students will pay, will have to start repaying their debts on minimum wage, on living wage, which seems scandalous to me.
So I think the 2 totemic things that were really negative for young people in the budget, the first was the freezing of the Plan 2 student loan threshold, which is students from England who started university between 2012 and 2022. It will go up next April, but then it's frozen for 3 years. It's another form of fiscal drag.
Yeah, it is.
And I think it was a really bad piece of signalling. The second one I'm probably responsible for. Right, and that is, I have been fighting the cash ISA cut for the last year. I've been in 3 times, 2 times with the Chancellor, the Economic Secretary. When I went in 3 weeks ago, and I knew the writing was on the wall in that meeting, and the Chancellor's argument have always been, this isn't about raising revenue, this is about getting young people to invest. And my point then was, if you're trying to get younger people to invest by cutting the cash ISA limit, which I don't think is the right way to do it, carrot not stick, but that's not what we're talking about, then why are you going to penalise older people by cutting their ISA allowance? And she said, OK, what about if we didn't do it for over 65s? And I said, yes, that's a good idea. And I still think it is a good idea because it makes no logical sense to cut an ISA allowance for a 65-year-old to make a young person to invest. But again, when you look at that as a signal to young people, I would have preferred not to do it at all. But at least that carve-out was helpful. But when you look at that as signalling, along with the student finance, along with the triple lock, all of that, I can absolutely see why it starts to look like intergenerational battling.
Well, it is intergenerationally unfair, isn't it?
Yes, I mean, to an extent it is. And then you get the state pension thing, which wasn't what I was asking for. And then people are going, hold on, so if a state pensioner earns over the personal allowance, they don't pay tax. But if I earn over the personal allowance for going out to work...
If you're somebody who's a recent student...
Yeah, and I'm 25 years old, then I will pay tax. And all of these, I don't think the injustices are actually manifest, but I think they're totemic. And I think that's the difficulty the government are facing.
Yeah, very interesting. We love having you on. Thank you so much for joining us again. I know you've got a bit of a cold, so we're particularly grateful. Tom, I actually want to come to you with an issue that I actually talked to your colleague Mel Stride, the Shadow Chancellor, about last week. If the Tory party wants to be credible in terms of managing the public finances, the thing that it ought to grasp, and I think you agree with this, but I'd like to know, is that the triple lock has to be reformed. Because if you look at the massive increase in the welfare bill, 35 billion over the next 5 years, a huge chunk, well, the 35 billion is all benefits to older people, and the triple lock is responsible for a huge proportion of that. So we've got to look at that again, haven't we?
Well, I said so in my response to the budget, as you no doubt heard, because you listen assiduously to everything I say in the Commons. But the reality is that what we're seeing, sadly, an increasing penalty on those who are working, those who are earning, those who are trying to start out. So Martin's just set out a few issues there, and I'm sure James is going to respond to them. But the reality is we are seeing a penalisation of working, and because of that, we're seeing young people looking to start their lives overseas. I was talking to somebody only yesterday in their early 20s who started working here and is now looking to move to Dubai. And by the way, he's not the only one, because people are voting with their feet. They're voting out because the penalties on working in the United Kingdom have grown so great.
And Layla, I know student loans are a slightly painful subject for Lib Dems, but do you think that the government was wrong to freeze those thresholds?
Absolutely. I mean, the thing is, it was very painful, but what Vince Cable did do, remember in a background where there was a view that potentially those rates would be not capped at all, was that threshold would be kept at a rate that was affordable for young people at the time, and that they absolutely should never have got as extortionate as they are. And there's been a couple of things over the years that has happened. One is the freezing of the thresholds, but also interest rates were hiked at several points, particularly during the last few years. So it's not just the drag, it's historic interest rates that went up as well. And there's that double whammy now for young people. It's wrong. It's absolutely the wrong thing to do.
Now, I'm going to turn just for a moment to James Murray, who is the Chief Secretary to the Treasury, the Deputy to the Chancellor. And I want to pick up in a minute or two on the chaos in the run-up to the budget. But I just want to start, actually, with Martin's big point, which is that if you're a young person, you believe you will feel that the budget is targeting you, that it's been unfair, and that you're featherbedding older people.
Well, what I would say about young people is that young people need hope for the future, and part of that comes down to things like, can they afford to buy a home? And one of the big things we've been doing as a government since we got in is completely changing the planning system to get more homes built. We've had the Renters' Right Act has come in. If you look at what the Chancellor announced in the budget...
They're going to have less money, James, if they're being forced to repay their student loans when they're on the living wage.
No, but the national living wage is going up, as is the national minimum wage. Those are important things to put more money in people's pockets. And obviously, if young people are paying energy bills, they'll see £150 come off their energy bills. If they travel by train, they'll see their rail fares frozen. If they need prescription charges, people need that at all ages, they'll see that frozen as well. But this was a real budget which was focused on cutting the cost of living, as well as cutting NHS waiting lists and government borrowing.
Now, I do have to take you back to the preparations for the budget. I was genuinely shocked when the Office for Budget Responsibility felt that it had to publish a timetable of what it told the Treasury when about the state of the public finances. They've never done that before, and they did that because they were very concerned that all the presentation in the run-up to the budget was presenting a very misleading picture of the state of the public finances. Why on earth did that happen?
No, look, one of the reasons why that letter was published is because of the unusual circumstances around this budget in terms of the productivity review that the OBR carried out.
No, that's not... Hang on. You know, all due respect to you, the OBR... David Miles went to see MPs on the Treasury Select Committee and he said that But it was published for the very precise reason that information in the public domain was wrong.
No, I'm sorry. If you look at what Professor Miles said to the Treasury committee, he said that it was not misleading what has been said.
No. He was talking about the press conference. No. He was talking about the press conference. He actually said that OBR officials went to the Treasury and complained about briefings that were sending out the wrong message to the public. He said that.
Hang on. He was very clear that what the Chancellor set out in her speech on November the 4th...
Yeah, I'm not asking you about that, James, so you don't need to tell me about that. Okay. I'm asking you a different question.
No, but he was very clear that...
But why are you repeating something that's not an answer to my question?
I am responding. If you just let me answer this. He was talking about what the OBR published in their letter in relation to the October the 31st forecast. And he said that headroom of around £4 billion, which was on the October 31st forecast, was entirely consistent with there being a very challenging fiscal situation. And what the Chancellor set out was the challenges
you are, in all due respect, you're not answering my question. What they were concerned about was not the press conference. They were concerned about misinformation in the run-up to the press conference and indeed subsequent to the press conference. And you haven't given me a remotely convincing answer about how that happened.
Well, look, we take information security very seriously. And as I confirmed in the House of Commons today, and I mentioned it yesterday as well, there's a leak inquiry underway around some of that information that came out on November the 13th. The Permanent Secretary is doing a review of information security to make sure that it's in place for future fiscal events. But that's the response that we've taken to it. And look, that leak inquiry, the Chancellor, myself, all of the team are fully behind that.
And how embarrassing would it be if the Financial Conduct Authority decided to launch an investigation into whether there was a false market as a result of this misinformation?
Well, look, this is something that opposition politicians are talking about. The Chancellor set out her budget. She did what she said she was going to do. She's cutting the cost of living, cutting NHS waiting lists and cutting government borrowing.
Look, there's tons more I need to talk to you about, so don't you go away and don't you go away either, because we're going to come back to one of your favourite subjects, and really it depends which side of the debate you're on, how excited I guess you'll be, and that's Brexit. And we're also going to be talking to the former head of NATO, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, about the threat posed by Putin and whether there's any chance of peace anytime soon. Don't go away.
Excellent. Well, welcome to the break. Our youth tracker has obviously shown that many young people are feeling left behind. We talked to the Gen Z members of our team, Martin, and asked them what they most wanted to know about from you, their concerns for the future. We've got a couple of minutes. We're going to zip through them, if we may. One said to us, I don't see how I'll ever buy a house.
Look, I think you're going to be older and it's going to take more time. And, you know, we've shifted the burden, student loans, not because of tuition fees, but because we've shifted the burden of student loan repayments substantially more to the individual and away from the state. All of it makes it more difficult. We also have uncertainty over what's happening with the lifetime ISA at the moment, which makes it more difficult. But if I go back to it, it looks very different. People, you know, your team, if we're talking about careers progress, incomes get bigger, you put away what you can right now, and you try and save in the right way, which currently is still a lifetime ISA, and you will get there eventually.
Very hard.
And we have to be hopeful. There's no point in not. So you will get there.
Very hard without Bank of Mum and Dad, isn't it? And paying off university debts feel like such a burden. We've got about 30 seconds on this. What would you say to the people who are saying that whether they should tell their younger brother not to bother?
University is expensive, but it isn't a debt. It is effectively a graduate tax that you are going to pay 9% of an increase of your salary above the threshold for up to 40 years afterwards. It's an expensive tax, but it's far better to mentally frame it as a debt. If you succeed financially because of your university, it's going to cost you a fortune. If you don't succeed financially because of university, it won't cost you that much. So it's only for those people for whom university is right for, but the framing of it as a debt is something I wish we could change as a nation. No political parties had the balls to do it, but they should do it.
Thank you, and that's us, but we'll ask you the other questions off air later.
Okay,
Thank you,
sure.
Martin.
Welcome back. James Murray, number 2 to the Chancellor, Chief Secretary of the Treasury, still with me. Before I go back to him, Pippa, you've got a few things to say.
In Prime Minister's questions today, Keir Starmer was asked if he would consider joining a customs union with the EU. He rejected this, saying it crossed one of Labour's Brexit red lines. But I've been hearing that he's been coming under growing pressure from within his own party as the public mood has shifted. Now, this polling was done by YouGov back in June to mark 9 years since the country voted to leave. As you can see, over half of people back rejoining the EU. Although this is divisive, 34% oppose it. Support for joining the customs union or the single market is fairly similar, but a much bigger contingent of don't knows. It's been a long time since all those Brexit votes in Parliament. But it does appear that the public are less rigid about those red lines. Now, James, the Prime Minister said that he wants an even closer relationship with the EU, beyond even the existing reset which he's negotiated. How much further do you think you can go before you cross your red lines?
Well, I think you're absolutely right that we're not going to cross our red lines, and we were all elected on that basis. No customs union, no single market, no freedom of movement. But what the Prime Minister was saying, and what is the principles the government is following, is that we should take down barriers to trade wherever we can, because we know that the botched Brexit deal caused damage to our economy. That's part of what the OBR found in their review of productivity that we were talking about earlier. And we know that if we can get barriers out of the way, it's good for British businesses to export. It brings down costs for people going to the shops here. So look, we need to build on that deal that we've got with the EU, the reset. We need to make sure we've got a food and drink trade deal, which we're working on them with, the youth experience scheme, the energy trading scheme. There are things we can do which make life better and help with the cost of living for people here in Britain.
But you know, James, that all of those, even if you succeed in getting all of those across the line, the increment in terms of national income is a rounding error. You know, the OBR has already said it does nothing in terms of their expectations of growth. When I heard the Prime Minister today talking about the damage that Brexit had done, you know, it seemed to me he was basically implying that, you know, he sort of desperately wished that he hadn't put in your manifesto these pledges not to rejoin the single market and the customs union. It's a bit like ruling out putting up the rates of tax on basic, you know, income tax and VAT. It was another manifesto mistake, wasn't it?
No, I think it was really important to make clear to people that we respect the decision about Brexit. We respect the fact that we've left the European Union, obviously, and that's why we have those red lines. But within those red lines, we want to do what's in our national interest, and it's in our interest to get barriers out of the way to trade.
It certainly is in our national interest to get barriers out of the way and see a meaningful impact, increase in people's living standards. The Prime Minister's own Chief Economic Advisor, Manish Shafiq, as we know, recently told colleagues that rejoining the customs union would have a meaningful impact on our living standards and growth in a way that everything you've described won't.
But we've got these clear red lines, Robert, and it's important that we have those red lines to be clear that we respect the fact that we've left the EU.
What are red lines that make us poorer?
Well, the red lines are important to make clear that we've left the EU. We're not winding back the clock, but we're looking forward to see what we can do in the future. And the reset, the EU deal that the Prime Minister secured, is a really important change of approach with the EU to make sure that we can be positive about taking barriers out of the way to the benefit of people in Britain, like the trade deal around food and drink, to make sure that we can export and import things more easily and more cheaply. You know, think about all of the extra red tape.
Sure. Unfortunately, even if you add all that together, the increment to GDP is literally, you know...
I think it's about 9 billion by 2040.
Yeah, which is a rounding error. I mean, in an economy that's 3 trillion...
I think 9 billion out of the deal that we've struck, I don't think is to be sniffed at. And I think it's important for people to make sure that we take down those barriers where we can, when it's in the interest of British businesses.
James, as always, thank you so much for coming in. Really, really good to see you. I mean, what I'd like to put to you, Layla, is all the polling shows that there are growing numbers of people in this country who are desperate for one of the leading parties to be more ambitious in terms of rebuilding relations with the EU. There's actually now a majority who say it was a terrible mistake to leave the EU. So why are the Lib Dems only offering something fairly tepid, which is rejoining the customs union?
Well, I think we have to start somewhere. We're actually trying to help the government because we think they can do this within their red lines. Just look, if Turkey can have a customs union with the European Union, we absolutely can too. That's not rejoining, that's nowhere close to rejoining, but it would have a palpable difference, make a palpable difference to the economy to the tune of circa 25 billion in the context of, so there's a leading American think tank that's looked at the real impact of Brexit over time. I mean, James is right, it was absolutely botched. They think it's worth between 60 and 90 billion pounds a year to the exchequer. Think what we could have done with that money. We have to start going backwards. But the reason why we can't go the whole hog now, we also have partners that we need to rebuild relations with too. So let's start here and then keep growing. We're going to bring a vote on this, by the way, in Parliament next week. And I hope many backbench Labour members who are making this case will come with us.
I mean, Tom, in your heart, is there anything that Layla's said that you disagree with?
Yes, there is. Look, the reality is, Robert, most of my parliamentary life has been spent debating in the most vicious ways various aspects of European policy. Do we really want to go through those Brexit nightmares again? Because all we'll be doing is
maybe we have to if we want an economic recovery.
No, what we need to be doing is we need to actually be stimulating growth in our own economy. That's about liberating capital, encouraging people to start businesses and create jobs here at home, and recognising that the world has changed. Look, since we left, we've signed up with the CPTPP, which is a growing trade alliance, as you know. AI has come in. We are the only European country that's got a sensible AI policy. Yep. We are literally the only European country that has got the possibility to grow in Asia and develop our own economy. What we need is the capital liberation at home that you and I have spoken about.
We've talked about, and we agree we need capital liberation, and we'll maybe find another time to talk about that in more detail. But Pippa, you are going to take us on to Mr. Putin.
I am. Well, another round of talks aimed at ending the conflict in Ukraine has broken up with little progress. We don't know what the latest version of the peace plan looks like, but the leaked original one suggested that Kyiv should cede territory that they currently hold. This chart shows how much Ukrainian land has been occupied by Russia since the start of the conflict. See the sharp spike here back in February 2022. At the start of the war, Moscow managed to capture a quarter of the country's territory. The Ukrainians pushed back hard this fall here, so that just over 17% was still occupied by November that year. And over the next 18 months, both armies became mired in a brutal battle for incremental gains. But the line has gradually increased since summer 2024 as the Russians slowly expanded their control to nearly 20%. But at a huge human cost. According to the MOD in November, Russia was sustaining over 1,000 casualties a day. But it isn't just the human cost which will decide the outcome of the war. These charts show the estimated total GDP loss if the conflict goes on for another 2 years. It would cost Russia almost $1.7 trillion, which includes sanctions. The impact in cash terms on Ukraine is significantly lower, just $385 billion. But when you account for the relative sizes of the two economies, you see how much more painful it is for Ukraine. It costs 193% of its pre-conflict GDP. You can see how reliant it's become on foreign allies. Robert.
Yeah, well, absolutely gripping stuff. Thanks, Pippa. And, following that, I had a conversation a little bit earlier with the former NATO Secretary-General, who was also Premier of Denmark, Anders Fogh Rasmussen. I pointed out to him the remarks of the Russian President, Vladimir Putin, that Russia, Putin says, is ready for a wider war with European nations. So I asked Anders if he thought Putin was bluffing or if genuinely he means it.
I think he is, but obviously it's a threat, like all the other threats we have heard from Putin. I don't think we should give in to pressure from a dictator like Putin.
No, but are we ready, therefore?
Yes, I think we are ready. Our weakness is that Europe so far has seemed to be a bit split, but I think with push comes to shove and Putin really attacks Europe, then we could quickly mobilize sufficient sources to launch a counterattack.
Gosh, that is going to trouble really quite a lot of our viewers, that you think there is a genuinely significant risk of this conflict escalating to involve EU and indeed countries like Britain directly. I have noted that other European countries like France, for example, are trying to, if they're not introducing conscription, they're moving towards getting their young people more engaged in the military. Should Britain be doing that?
Personally, I'm in favor of conscription all over Europe because we need an engagement in defending your own country. Let me remind you, the size of the Russian economy is only equivalent to the size of the Italian economy. So obviously, if we really mobilize all our resources and if every European has a strong will to defend their own country, then Russia will not have a chance against us.
Against that backdrop, is President Trump's, are the Witkoff-Trump negotiations with Putin just a total waste of time?
Yes, I think that famous 28-point plan has done more harm than good. It's called an American peace plan, but the fact is it is neither American nor a peace plan. It's a Russian wish list, which amounts to a Ukrainian capitulation document.
So are you broadly saying that there now is no alternative? We either defeat Putin or we capitulate. And obviously you don't want to capitulate. So your view is that, you know, there is no possibility of an acceptable peace. And therefore, really, the only strategy now is to defeat Putin.
The fact is, again, Putin does not want peace. As long as Putin believes that he has a chance to win on the battlefield, he has no incentive whatsoever to engage in a constructive peace negotiation. That is the only way to force Putin into a negotiation process is to put more pressure on Putin, deliver more military assistance to Ukraine, deliver more financial assistance to Ukraine. That is the only way. The shortest way to peace is to be prepared for war.
So there'll be chilling but important stuff from former NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen in just a minute after the break. So welcome back. In the second half of my interview with the former NATO Secretary-General, Anders Fogh Rasmussen, I pointed out to him that Mark Rutte, the current Secretary-General, has today said that Europe is ready for war with Putin. And I wondered if he thought Rutte agreed with him, with Rasmussen, that such a war was not a small risk.
Yes, indeed. And we should never doubt the credibility of NATO's Article 5, which states that we consider an attack on one ally an attack on all. So if Putin really launches an attack against a NATO ally, the response will be quick, it will be hard, it will be determined.
And just to be clear, do you believe that Donald Trump would honour Article 5? And if he didn't engage with us in a war with Putin. Could we win it?
Yes, indeed. I believe that Europe is able to stand on its own feet already now. Well, we have more to do. There are clearly weaknesses. But, for instance, Poland has increased its defense investment to pretty close to 5%. I spoke with the Lithuanians yesterday. They will be above 5% next year. And a lot of other countries are following suit. I think Putin's attack on Ukraine was a wake-up call. So was the election of President Trump in the US. So the Europeans now realize we have to stand on our own feet. And I think we're able to do that.
And just finally, because I think our viewers will want to understand the risks, what would you say the probability of a wider European conflict with Russia is over, let's say, the next year? Greater than evens? Greater than 50%?
Within the next year, there is no risk. But according to our intelligence agencies, we must be prepared for a possible Russian attack on one or more European countries by the end of this decade. And that's why we have to ramp up our defense industrial production. That's why we have to infuse a new mentality in the heads of people. We shouldn't pretend that we are in peacetime any longer. Maybe we are not at war directly with Russia, but we're in between, and we should be prepared for everything. And as the old Romans said, if you want peace, be prepared for war.
Anders Fogh Rasmussen, as always, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you.
Now, if you are a glutton for that kind of scary punishment, you can watch an even longer version of that interview over on the Peston YouTube channel. Unmissable. Now, I want to pick up on a number of things that the former NATO Secretary-General said. He's in favour of conscription. Actually, Rishi Sunak, in the general election, remember the general election, had a sort of version of national service in the manifesto. Do you think that we are moving to a period where there will have to be some version of national service conscription for younger people?
No, I don't. I think we've got a very good reserves model in the United Kingdom, and many of the countries that are moving towards various forms of conscription have never had a reserves model in the same way that we've run it for about a century. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to fill a gap. Now, I understand why they're doing it. And for some countries, Finland, the Baltic states, Poland, you know, the press is rather more urgent on them than it is on us. So
we've got enough able-bodied people, have we?
Well, I want to see a much larger armed forces. I mean, I've written about this on numerous occasions, and by the way, this is something that's happened over 30 years, not just over one. So this isn't a single party, this isn't a single government, but we have effectively disarmed ourselves to the point where we are no longer truly credible in military terms, and we need to reverse that.
And you seem to be agreeing, Layla. You don't think we've got enough people in the army?
Democrats want to see more armed forces personnel. We want them to be looked after well. We want to make sure their homes are refurbished and their families are looked after. We back the government's plan to increase spending on defence over a number of years. And I think you know, these are sobering words that we heard from former NATO Secretary-General. We have to heed them, but he's right. We need to prepare. This is not how it was 10 years ago, where we thought that it was the end of wars. We are not there at all. And actually, while Trump seems to have got slightly warmer towards NATO, he remains, I think, a slightly unreliable ally. So we have to be prepared. I'm almost out of time.
I want to ask Tom just one very quick question. He thinks that Europe can beat Putin without Trump. Is he right?
Well, it depends what Putin tries. At the moment, Putin has used Novichok in Salisbury, polonium in London. He's tried to murder the Prime Minister of Montenegro. He's tried to spread migration problems over from Belarus. You know, he is already conducting warlike acts against Europe.
Right, sobering way to go into a short break. That is it. The tree's been bought, the candles lit, the mince pies are warming. If the government wants to continue self-harming, I'm going to sleep through it. See you in January. Happy holidays to all of you. Goodbye.